My name is Clara Whitmore, and at 39, I found myself standing in the front row of my mother's funeral, flanked by memories I hadn't unpacked in years. I hadn't seen my sister Caroline since the day she stole my fiancé. Not at family holidays, not for birthdays, not even when Dad had his stroke last winter. We had managed to live 6 years in the same city without crossing paths, but death doesn't care about boundaries. And so there we were, back in the same church where I once dreamed of getting married. Only now, I was wearing black and clutching a folded obituary. The room was quiet, heavy with the kind of sadness that comes when you lose the one person who kept everyone else in line. My mother, Eleanor, had been our family's anchor, the one who knew when to hold space and when to speak the truth. She didn't always succeed at keeping the peace, but she tried harder than any of us ever did. Then I saw them. Caroline, Ethan. She walked in first, her arm linked through his like she belonged there, like she hadn't shattered our family with a smile and a secret. He followed, slightly hunched, like the years hadn't been kind. Or maybe just the truth hadn't been. She was dressed perfectly, of course, always was. Slim black dress, tasteful jewelry, too much perfume. Her heels clicked across the marble floor like punctuation marks. And on her left hand? Still my engagement ring. I didn't speak, neither did they. But when our eyes met, I saw it. That flicker. That half second when she realized the woman in the front row wasn't broken anymore. Just different. And then he saw who I was standing next to. Let's just say it wasn't the reunion they expected. But before that moment, before the tension, the whispers, and the fallout, I want to take you back. Because betrayal like this doesn't begin with a kiss. It begins long before, with patterns, silence, and the small ways sisters stop being sisters. Let me tell you what happened before the funeral, when the betrayal started growing roots. Have you ever walked into a room where someone didn't expect you to matter, and you stayed anyway? If you've been there, I'd love to hear your story. Drop it in the comments below. And if you want more stories like this, hit that subscribe button. This space is for women who've rebuilt from silence. Caroline wasn't always the villain in my story. Growing up, she was the little sister who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, clutching her favorite blanket and whispering, "Don't tell Mom I'm scared." She was the one I read bedtime stories to, who stole my sweaters, and always insisted on sitting next to me during family dinners. But somewhere between childhood and adulthood, the closeness turned into competition. If I got straight A's, she pushed harder for the next award. If I bought a new dress, she'd find one just like it, but slightly more expensive. When I got promoted to marketing director, she conveniently switched careers and started working in PR. Something more exciting, she said, less corporate than yours. It was never overt, never loud. Caroline didn't fight with words. She fought with smiles, with subtle one-upping, and with that exhausting charm that made people adore her, even when they should have known better. So when I met Ethan, I wanted to believe we were finally growing out of that old pattern. He was smart, successful, attentive. A tech entrepreneur with a soft spot for jazz and bad puns. I introduced him to Caroline over dinner one night at my apartment. She wore that perfume I'd always said gave me headaches. She laughed too loudly at his jokes, touched his arm a bit too often, but I brushed it off. She's just being friendly, I told myself. She's happy for you, Mom said when I brought it up. You're imagining things, Ethan added later, half joking. Maybe I was. Or maybe I just didn't want to admit what my gut already knew. Some betrayals don't come with warnings. They arrive dressed as support, cloaked in concern, hidden behind the word sister. I ignored the signs. I wanted peace more than I wanted the truth. But the truth has a way of resurfacing, especially when you try too hard to keep it buried. And mine came back not with a scream, but with a silver earring. Let me tell you what I found, and how that tiny piece of jewelry unraveled everything I thought I knew. I found the earring while cleaning Ethan's car. It was wedged between the passenger seat and the center console, a delicate silver drop with a tiny sapphire in the middle. I knew it instantly. It was part of a pair our grandmother had gifted Caroline on her 21st birthday. I remembered how she wore them proudly to my engagement party, her hair swept back just enough for them to catch the light. For a long moment, I just stared at it in my palm. It could have meant nothing. It could have been innocent. But deep down, I already knew it wasn't. When I confronted Ethan that evening, he barely blinked. "Oh, your sister must have dropped it when I gave her a ride to the florist," he said. Smooth, practiced, empty. "She mentioned she'd lost one," he added, like it was just another errand he'd forgotten to mention. "And you just forgot to tell me?" I asked quietly. "I didn't think it mattered," he shrugged. Caroline's version matched his word for word. Too perfectly. That night I couldn't sleep. My mind spun in circles, rewinding months of moments, half-truths, lingering glances, missed dinners, vague excuses. I started seeing a therapist the next week. Not because I wanted to leave him, but because I didn't know how to stop losing myself trying to keep him. 3 weeks before the wedding, Ethan told me he wanted to postpone. "I'm worried about you," he said. "You're not yourself lately." He was right, but not in the way he thought. I remember begging him to just tell me what was wrong. I offered to fix it, to be better, to make him happy. He said it wasn't me. But at 3 a.m. that night, I woke to find his side of the bed empty, and his voice whispering in the guest room. "Not now. She'll hear us." I know. Soon, I promise. The next day, I brought him lunch at his office. Margot, his secretary, looked startled. "He asked not to be disturbed," she said. "I won't be long," I smiled, walking past her. And that's when it happened. I opened the door and found them. Ethan, Caroline, his hands on her waist, her arms wrapped around his neck, their lips locked like I didn't exist. They didn't see me at first. For those few seconds I stood frozen, watching the woman I used to share bunk beds with kissing the man I once thought I'd grow old with. When they finally noticed me, everything slowed down. Ethan stepped back first. "This isn't what it looks like," he lied. Caroline didn't even bother. She just said, "It wasn't planned. It just happened." I wanted to scream, to cry, to collapse, but instead, I stayed quiet. "How long?" I asked. Ethan looked at her, then at me. "Since the engagement party." It had been months of lies, of smiling across dinner tables, of pretending. That night, I packed what little dignity I had left into a bag and walked away. I left the apartment, the ring, the life I thought I had, because something inside me had broken, but not in the way they hoped. It wasn't just an ending. It was the beginning of something I hadn't realized I needed, a life without either of them in it. And so, I made a decision that would change everything. It was time to leave Boston, not out of fear, but out of clarity. Let me tell you how starting over in a strange city gave me back the woman I lost. People love to say, "Don't run away from your problems." But what if staying means slowly dissolving into someone you no longer recognize? After I left Ethan, the silence in my apartment was unbearable. Not just because it was quiet, but because it echoed all the things I had ignored. My own voice, my instincts, my needs. Every corner of Boston held a memory I didn't want to revisit. The bakery where we picked out wedding cakes. The restaurant where he first told me he loved me. The bench where Caroline and I used to eat ice cream as kids, back when I still believed sisterhood meant safety. My therapist asked me a simple question. Do you want to heal, or do you just want to cope? And I realized I'd spent years coping. Smiling through family dinners, swallowing suspicion, performing calmness just to keep the peace. But healing? That required distance, clarity, and space to rebuild. When a senior position opened at our firm's Chicago branch, I applied without telling anyone, not even my parents. I didn't need their approval. I needed a new beginning. When the offer came, I accepted it with the kind of urgency that scares people. But I wasn't scared. I was finally free. Packing was a strange kind of grief. I held every photo, every gift, every outfit I once wore thinking someone loved me, and asked myself if I wanted to carry it into the next chapter. Most of it went into donation boxes. On my last night in Boston, I stood in the middle of my empty living room and whispered out loud, "Thank you," and "goodbye." Some people think leaving means giving up, but leaving, for me, was reclaiming my power. It was looking at the ruins and saying, this is not where my story ends. Chicago didn't welcome me with open arms. The apartment was small. The snow came early. The loneliness hit hard. But for the first time in years, everything in my life was mine. My decisions, my space, my pace. And in that stillness, between frozen sidewalks and takeout dinners, I met someone who didn't need to be dazzling to be dependable. Someone who didn't try to fix me. Just stood still long enough for me to remember how to breathe again. Let me tell you how I met Zachary and why his quiet presence changed everything I thought I knew about love. I met Zachary at a business dinner. I wasn't looking for anyone. I had become the kind of woman who scanned for exits more than eye contact, who could carry on a perfectly polite conversation without offering an inch of herself. I was tired of being seen by men who only looked at what they could use or undo. Zachary didn't sparkle like Ethan. He didn't lean in with flirtation or compliment my smile or make grand gestures. He just asked thoughtful questions, listened without interrupting, and spoke like someone who had nothing to prove, because he'd already made peace with who he was. We ended up sitting next to each other again the next day during a conference panel on ethical investing. He passed me a note on a napkin when one of the speakers made a bold claim. Is it still ethical if you're the only one who profits? I laughed, not because the joke was brilliant, but because it wasn't trying to impress me, and I hadn't laughed like that in a long time. He emailed me a week later. No pressure, no suggestion of dinner, just a question about a trend I'd mentioned in passing during our chat. So began a rhythm I didn't see coming. Work emails turned into coffee catch-ups. Coffee turned into weekend walks. No lines were crossed. No expectations set. It was maddeningly calm. And in that calm, something in me softened. One evening, after a long walk along the lakefront, he looked at me and said, "You don't flinch when you're quiet." Most people do. I didn't know what to say. No one had ever framed silence as strength before. I told him the truth about Ethan, about Caroline, about the way betrayal doesn't just take your trust, but your sense of judgment. He listened, not like a man waiting for his turn to speak, but like someone holding a fragile object in his hands, fully aware it could break. And when I panicked during our first real date, tears welling, hands shaking, heart racing, he didn't walk away. He sat beside me, steady and quiet, and said, We can just breathe together for a while." That was the moment I knew. He wasn't dazzling. He wasn't dramatic. But Zachary was safe. And sometimes, when you've spent years being shattered by charm, safety is the most radical kind of love. But the universe wasn't done writing twists, because as it turned out, Zachary had a connection to my past that neither of us could ignore. And that connection would lead to the most unexpected moment, right in front of Caroline and Ethan. Let me tell you what happened at my mother's funeral, and how the tables turned. My mother's funeral wasn't supposed to be a battlefield, but grief has a way of peeling back the layers and exposing what's still festering underneath. When Caroline walked in with Ethan, the room shifted. Conversations quieted. Heads turned, and I watched her drink in the attention like it belonged to her. She wore that diamond ring like a medal, not a memory. He stood beside her, uncomfortable in his skin, as if even his suit knew he didn't belong. I didn't say a word. Not during the service, not during the reception, not even when she found me in the hallway and tried to flaunt her new life like a prize. "We just bought a summer house in Nantucket," she smiled, her voice honeyed with condescension. "Private beach, 8 bedrooms. We're thinking of starting a family soon." I smiled back, gently. "That's lovely," I said. "Have you met my husband yet?" Her smirk flickered. Zachary stepped forward from behind me, perfectly timed, calm, composed, devastatingly quiet. And then Ethan saw him. His face went pale. "Foster," he breathed. Zachary nodded. "Reynolds." The air thickened, because in the business world, their names carried weight, and years ago, Ethan had backed a flashy, overpromised startup. Zachary had backed its quieter, steadier competitor, the one that eventually got acquired for 8 figures. It was the kind of story that lived in tech circles like a cautionary tale. And now, the man who outplayed Ethan was married to the woman he betrayed. Caroline looked from Ethan to Zachary, then to me, finally understanding the cosmic irony of the moment. No screaming, no drama, just an elegant checkmate. And the best part? I hadn't planned any of it. I didn't need revenge. I just needed to keep building my life and let the truth arrive on its own timing. Because some power doesn't come from shouting louder. It comes from refusing to shrink. That day, I didn't reclaim the past. I outgrew it. But the story didn't end there, because the woman who once broke me showed up at my door years later, no ring, no bravado, asking for something I never expected. A second chance. Let me tell you what happened the day Caroline came back, not as a rival, but as someone finally ready to tell the truth. Caroline showed up on a rainy Tuesday. No grand entrance, no diamond ring, no Ethan. Just a small umbrella, a tired face, and eyes that looked older than I remembered. "I'm not here to ask for anything," she said quietly. I wanted to tell you the truth." We sat in the kitchen, the same one where we'd once whispered secrets as little girls, hiding cookies under the tablecloth. But this time, there were no shared giggles, just a silence heavy with years of things unsaid. She spoke first. "After the wedding," she said, staring into her mug. "It didn't take long before the facade cracked. Ethan was never the man I thought he was. Maybe he never was. He became cold, controlling. Every outfit I wore was too much or not enough. Every opinion I had became a threat. I listened, quietly, but not passively. She told me about the mounting debt, the strained image management, the way Ethan resented her for needing him, even as he criticized her for being too independent. "I used to scroll through your social media," she admitted, "telling myself you were just pretending to be happy. But you weren't pretending, were you?" I didn't answer. She already knew. Her voice broke. I made choices I can't undo. I betrayed you in a way no sister ever should. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just needed to say it. And for a moment, I saw her. Not the girl who tried to outshine me. Not the woman who stole the man I loved. But just another broken person, finally telling the truth. Forgiveness didn't come rushing in like a flood. It came slowly, like breath returning after a long cry. Not because she earned it, but because I was tired of holding pain that no longer belonged to me. Forgiveness, I've learned, is not a reward we give others. It's a boundary we draw for ourselves. It says, I will not carry this anymore. I will not let your choices decide the weight of my life. Did I trust her again? Not entirely. Did I love her? In a way that only years and blood can explain. But most importantly, I forgave her. Not to let her in, but to finally set myself free. And from that quiet moment in the kitchen, something began to shift. Because when you let go of the story they wrote for you, you get to write the ending. And mine? It turned out to be more beautiful than I ever imagined. Let me tell you how the life I rebuilt, on my own terms, gave me back not just hope, but something even deeper. Peace. Have you ever forgiven someone, not because they deserved it, but because you needed peace? Tell me in the comments. I read every one of them. And if this story reflects even a part of yours, don't forget to subscribe. You're not alone here. Some scars never fade, but they stop hurting when you stop pressing on them every day. 2 years after Caroline came back into my life, I found myself standing in the nursery Zachary and I had painted together. Soft sage walls, sunlight streaming through linen curtains, the faint scent of baby powder in the air. I was holding our daughter, and in that moment, I realized everything I'd lost had made space for everything I'd never dared to imagine. The pain? It didn't disappear, but it stopped defining me, because I wasn't the woman Ethan abandoned. I wasn't the sister Caroline betrayed. I wasn't the one who left Boston in pieces. I was someone entirely new, someone who built a life not to prove anything to anyone, but simply because I finally believed I deserved one. Zachary never asked me to forget what happened. He just made sure I never had to face that kind of pain alone again. He stood by me through therapy appointments, fertility treatments, job promotions, and moments of fear that came out of nowhere. And through it all, he never once made me feel like I was too much to love. Caroline, for her part, kept her distance, but stayed honest. She filed for divorce. She moved into a modest apartment. She got a real job. She started again. And maybe that's what real forgiveness makes possible. Not reunions, not happy endings, but growth. Quiet, steady growth. There are still days I think about the girl I used to be. The one who wanted the perfect wedding. The one who ignored the signs to keep the peace. The one who thought love had to be proven, not received. But that version of me was necessary. She broke so I could rebuild. And what I have now, this life I live today, isn't perfect. But it is peaceful. It is honest. And it is entirely mine. So if you're sitting in your own version of heartbreak, wondering if it ever gets better, let me be the one to tell you, it can, and it will. Not overnight, not easily, but eventually, in a way so gentle you might not even notice it at first. Until one day you wake up and realize you didn't just survive it, you built something better because of it. And that, more than anything, makes the pain worth it. If you're walking through something heavy, I hope this story reminds you, it doesn't end here. Sometimes, the most painful chapters lead to the most honest life. If this spoke to you, let me know in the comments. Like, subscribe, and share this with someone who might need to hear, you didn't break, you rebuilt.